A colony can appear entirely healthy. Covered frames, active foragers, no visible sign of distress, while the queen is already in the final stages of reproductive failure. The brood pattern changes. It changes weeks before laying stops. Most beekeepers do not recognize those changes as a warning. They see scattered empty cells and attribute them to disease, chilled brood, or pesticide exposure. By the time laying stops entirely, the colony has already lost 3 weeks of replacement brood. The recovery window has closed. Have you experienced a collapse like this in your own hives? Leave a comment below. If you find this kind of biological detail useful, a like helps this content reach more beekeepers. The mechanism behind this pre-symptomatic window was understood, at least partially, by the most careful observers of the 19th and early 20th century. A.I. Root, writing in the early editions of what would become the ABC and XYZ of bee culture, described scattered brood and elevated drone production in worker comb as indicators of a queen in decline. Dadant made similar observations. They did not have the language of reproductive biology that exists today, but their field notes were precise. A queen's brood pattern degrades before her laying ceases. The question was never whether this degradation occurred. The question was whether beekeepers were paying close enough attention to catch it. What most beekeepers misunderstand is this: spotty brood is not always a disease signal. In many cases, it is a queen signal, specifically evidence of declining fertilization rates at the cellular level, manifesting across the face of the comb weeks before total laying failure. The timing matters more than most realize. A queen can appear to be laying actively, larvae present in cells, apparent normalcy across the surface, while the proportion of unfertilized eggs is already increasing. That increase does not announce itself. It shows up as pattern, and reading that pattern requires knowing what normal looks like in the first place. To understand what is actually happening inside the colony during this window, it is necessary to understand the queen's reproductive anatomy in functional terms. The queen bee stores sperm in a specialized organ called the spermatheca, a small spherical structure connected to her oviduct. During her mating flights, typically completed within the first 2 weeks of her adult life, she accumulates sperm from multiple drones. That stored sperm is the only supply she will ever have. There is no replenishment. From the moment her mating flights end, she is working against a finite biological reserve. Under normal conditions, the spermatheca releases sperm precisely as each egg passes through the oviduct. Worker cells receive fertilized eggs. Drone cells, being wider, trigger a different muscular response. No sperm is released, and an unfertilized egg is deposited. This process is mechanically exact when the queen is young and her sperm supply is viable. But sperm viability declines over time. The rate of decline is not uniform. It depends on the queen's genetics, her laying history, the colony's nutritional support, and factors that are not fully quantified even in modern apicultural science. What the historical literature documents, from Langstroth's era forward, is that the brood pattern is the visible record of that internal state. A pattern that begins deteriorating in March may signal a queen that will stop laying entirely by mid-April. That 3-week window is not a margin for continued observation. It is a decision window, and it closes on its own schedule, not the beekeepers. What does the deteriorating pattern actually look like? In the earliest phase, roughly 3 to 4 weeks before laying stops, the change is subtle. Individual cells within otherwise solid patches of capped worker brood are empty or contain larvae at inconsistent developmental stages. A frame that should show a continuous arc of capped brood from the center outward begins showing scattered empty cells, not clustered, but distributed across the face. 1 cell empty, 2 cells, a small gap in what should be an unbroken field. This is the stage that is most commonly misread. Experienced beekeepers familiar with chalk brood, sack brood, or European foul brood will run through a differential mentally, looking for the discoloration, the texture, the odor that would indicate pathogen presence. When those signs are absent, the empty cells are often attributed to hygienic behavior, a temporary laying pause, or minor environmental stress. The queen is not yet suspected. Then, across the following 1 to 2 weeks, the pattern changes character. The empty cells increase in number. More significantly, worker-sized cells begin containing larvae that develop into drones, a condition that in this phase is more precisely described as failed fertilization at the cellular level. The queen is still laying. She is laying frequently, but the proportion of eggs reaching the oviduct without receiving sperm is increasing. The spermatheca is becoming inconsistent. Beekeepers in the Root and Dadant tradition flagged this specifically. Root's descriptions of a failing queen in the cyclopedia include reference to brood patterns showing scattered empty cells and an unusual proportion of drone brood in worker comb. That specific combination, empty cells plus misplaced drones, is the pre-symptomatic signature. It precedes laying cessation by weeks. Spotty brood, scattered drones. Those two signals together. The colony's population response to this pattern begins immediately. Worker bees can detect developmental abnormalities in larvae. Cells containing improperly fertilized or non-viable eggs are cleaned and left empty. The bees are already responding to a failure the beekeeper has not yet identified. The hive is reacting. The beekeeper is still observing surface activity and concluding that nothing is wrong. If you value biology-based beekeeping, consider subscribing. The practical question that follows from this understanding is a precise one. Given that this pattern emerges 3 weeks before laying stops, what is the correct diagnostic procedure and what does it change about management timing? The first requirement is regular brood inspection. Not a quick scan of surface activity, but a deliberate frame-by-frame assessment during the active season. This means pulling the brood frames systematically and reading the pattern with full attention, not scanning from above. The inspection interval that matters here is roughly every 10 to 14 days during spring buildup and early summer. A pattern that looked acceptable 2 weeks ago can shift substantially in that interval. When inspecting, the beekeeper is looking for 3 things in combination: the density of capped worker brood relative to the open comb on the same frame, the presence or absence of eggs and young larvae in worker cells, and critically, the presence of drone brood in worker-sized cells. Any single one of these indicators in isolation may have an explanation that does not involve the queen. All 3 together, in a colony with no other disease indicators, constitute a high-confidence warning. The measurement that matters is not a single frame, it is the pattern across the brood nest. A failing queen's signature is not localized. It distributes across multiple frames. 1 spotty frame may mean nothing. 3 frames carrying the same distributed emptiness combined with misplaced drone brood is a different assessment entirely. Most queen failures that result in significant population loss were preceded by exactly this combination of signals. The loss was not sudden. It was incremental and visible to a beekeeper who knew what to look for. The intervention timing the historical literature supports is decisive action within that 3-week window. The colony still has a healthy worker population at this stage. It still has adequate brood coverage from the queen's prior normal laying period. It can accept a new queen, whether raised from the beekeeper's own stock or sourced externally, with a recovery trajectory that preserves the season. A queen introduced when the colony's population is strong and the brood nest is partially functional has a significantly better acceptance rate than one introduced after the colony has begun producing laying workers in response to total queen failure. Exact timing within the season matters here. A failing queen detected in early spring, late March or early April in temperate North American conditions leaves enough of the season for a newly accepted queen to build a full population before the primary nectar flow. A queen failure detected in July may still be addressed, but the population rebuild will occur against a declining forage window. The biological stakes are highest in the first half of the active season. The intervention itself, how to assess readiness for requeening, how to prepare the colony for queen introduction, is a separate body of practice. What the pre-symptomatic brood pattern analysis changes is simply the timing at which that intervention becomes possible. 3 weeks earlier than the conventional trigger point. 3 weeks of population continuity preserved. The larger point, the historical literature suggests, and that the biology supports, is this. The brood frame is a diagnostic instrument. It records the queen's internal reproductive state over the preceding 12 days, the development time of the brood within it. Every frame of capped brood is a document of what the queen was doing nearly 2 weeks ago. A clean, dense, consistent pattern says the queen was functioning normally at that time. A deteriorating pattern says something changed. Reading that document accurately and acting on it within the decision window is the discipline. More bees, fewer viable eggs. That is the core failure sequence. Strong laying rate, weak fertilization. That is what the pattern reveals. The beekeepers who documented this most carefully, Langstroth, Root, Dadant, and the contributors to the early American apicultural journals, were working without electron microscopy, without genetic analysis, without the vocabulary of spermathecal biology. What they had was sustained, methodical observation over full seasons, across many colonies, in varying conditions. Their descriptions of pre-failure brood patterns are consistent enough across independent sources to constitute a reliable field diagnostic. That consistency is not coincidence. It reflects a biological reality that had been playing out in every Apis mellifera colony long before any beekeeper thought to document it. The bees have not changed. The pattern has always been there. The question is whether it is being read. If this breakdown was useful, leave a comment with your experience. Subscribe for more historically grounded beekeeping insights.